They demolished my cabin while I was sleeping in it. No warning. No notice. Just the sound of splintering wood and a bulldozer's engine roaring 20 feet from my head. I barely escaped with my boots still on. Name's Dorian McCale. I'm a retired fire investigator, and I built that off-grid cabin with my own damn hands up in the north side of Windermere Ridge. Quiet place, surrounded by pines, just the way I like it. I bought that land 10 years ago, no HOA. I made sure of that. But last year, Windermere Ridge's HOA decided they wanted to expand jurisdiction. They held a shady vote, only existing HOA members participated, no notice sent to independent homeowners like me. And wouldn't you know it? Suddenly my little slice of peace was in violation of updated community standards. Leading the charge, Rosemary Geller, 50-something, peroxide blonde, always in a pastel pantsuit and barking like she owns the whole mountain. She never liked my cabin. Said it lowered the aesthetic of the neighborhood. Whatever that meant. I wasn't even in her neighborhood. She'd been hounding me for months, slipping violations under a rock on my porch. Non-standard roofing. Improper waste disposal. Unapproved solar panel installation. All complete garbage. I ignored them. My property wasn't even in their jurisdiction legally or physically. So when the walls of my cabin cracked at 3 in the morning from a backhoe slamming into the support beams, I knew exactly who was behind it. I grabbed my flashlight and stumbled outside, choking on dust and disbelief. A hired crew was tearing through the last corner of the structure like it was an abandoned shack. My dog, Jasper, was howling from inside my truck. "What the hell are you doing?" I shouted, waving my arms. One of the crew guys looked up, startled. "We were told this structure was condemned by the HOA. Orders came from a Rosemary Geller." "Does it look condemned to you?" I snapped, pointing at my still-burning fireplace and the damn coffee mug I just left on the porch rail. The guy looked sick. "We were told it was unoccupied." I called the sheriff right there. Not that it helped much. Deputy Lane came out, took a bunch of photos, filed a report, and kept saying, "This sounds civil, Dorian. You'll have to take it up in court." Civil, my ass. My whole cabin was flattened. I had no roof, no running water, no place to sleep but a cot in my truck, and Rosemary Geller was strutting around like she'd just won a beautification award. The next morning, she showed up in a beige Lexus, parked at the bottom of my gravel drive like she owned the damn mountain. "I assume you've been made aware of the demolition," she said, stepping out and fixing her sunglasses. "Regrettable but necessary. You were in violation of Article 7, Section 12 non-compliant dwellings. You have no legal jurisdiction here," I growled. "Oh, we do now," she said, holding up a stack of papers. "Windermere Ridge HOA annexed this land last quarter. Proper vote was held. You're on our books." "I never got a vote. I never agreed to be part of your little kingdom." She gave me this smug little tilt of her chin. "It's not about agreement. It's about order. You'll find that resistance only prolongs the inevitable." That's when I decided I wasn't going to just rebuild. I was going to bury her in court, and if I played this right, she'd be wearing an orange jumpsuit by the time I was done. I spent the next 48 hours living out of my pickup, parked beside the ruins of my cabin. The air still stank of diesel and splintered pine, and the wind kept dragging broken shingles across the dirt like ghosts. I didn't sleep much. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the dozer's blade tipping toward my bedroll. But I wasn't just sitting there grieving. I was building a file. First thing I did was dig through the ashes of what was left. My trail cams had survived. I'd mounted 3 of them around the property months ago, mostly to catch the occasional bear nosing through my compost bin. Turns out they caught something better. The night before the demolition, 2 men in HOA polo shirts snuck onto my land with bolt cutters. They clipped the chain on my gate, spray-painted "condemned" on a plywood board, and nailed it to my tool shed. One of them even took photos, probably to cover their tracks later. Not one official from the county was present. No building inspector, no code enforcement, just Geller's goons. I copied the footage to a USB and labeled it Exhibit A. Then I went to the county records office. I asked for every document related to Windermere Ridge's recent boundary expansion. The clerk, a woman named Trina with zero poker face, raised her eyebrows when she saw the request. "You part of that HOA?" she asked. "No," I said, "but apparently they think I am." She printed everything, over 200 pages. I took it all to a quiet study room at the library and started reading. Took me 4 hours to find it. Hidden in the minutes of a quarterly meeting. Unanimous approval to extend HOA jurisdiction to parcels along Ridgeview and Northside Pine, pending municipal review. Pending, not approved. No rubber stamp, no county sign-off, and no notification to affected property owners. I cross-referenced parcel numbers. My lot was listed illegally. It was a forged expansion, no legal weight. I called the county zoning office to confirm it. "That's not valid," the clerk told me. "An HOA can't unilaterally annex private parcels. There's a process, public hearings." Certified letters, voter participation from impacted residents. "None of that happened," I said. "File a complaint with municipal code enforcement, and you might want to talk to a lawyer." I did both. I found a guy named Terrence Collier. Former JAG Corps attorney, now semi-retired and living in a ranch house 2 towns over. He took one look at my trail cam footage and the forged HOA documents and leaned back in his chair. "Dorian," he said, "this isn't just a civil matter. This is criminal trespass, destruction of property, and possibly conspiracy to defraud if they used forged documents to justify it. So what's our move? We file for an injunction, report the forgery to the district attorney, and then we hit them with a civil suit so hard they forget how to spell jurisdiction." I nodded. "And Geller, she'll be the centerpiece." The injunction went through in less than a week. A judge reviewed our evidence and issued a cease and desist order against Windermere Ridge HOA. They couldn't enforce any rules, collect dues, or take action against any property outside their original boundary until a full investigation was complete. But the real fireworks started when the sheriff's office got involved. At first, they were hesitant. Most deputies didn't want to touch HOA drama with a 10-foot pole. But once I handed over the USB, the forged documents, and a certified letter from the zoning office confirming the annexation was bogus, things changed fast. 2 detectives were assigned to the case. They didn't say much during the first meeting, just took notes and asked for the names of everyone involved. I gave them the list: Rosemary Geller, her vice chairman Alan Bryce, and 2 others who had signed off on the expansion minutes. 3 weeks later, subpoenas started going out. Meanwhile, I had a temporary trailer delivered to the property. Nothing fancy, just enough to get a roof over my head and keep Jasper warm at night. I set up a new set of surveillance cameras, this time with motion alerts and infrared. I wasn't about to let anyone sneak back up my drive. One morning, Collier called me while I was chopping wood behind the trailer. "We got a court date," he said. "And you're going to like this. The DA decided to pursue charges. Geller's being brought in for questioning." "When?" "Today. They're picking her up at her home." I dropped the axe and let out a deep breath. Not in relief, in confirmation. Everything I'd done since the night they flattened my cabin had led to this. I drove into town later that afternoon. Geller's Lexus was parked outside the HOA office, same spot she always used. I waited in the cafe across the street, nursing a cup of bitter coffee and watching the windows. 20 minutes later, a black county cruiser pulled up. 2 detectives stepped out and entered the building. 10 minutes after that, Geller emerged in cuffs. She didn't shout, didn't cry, just kept her chin up, eyes forward, still dressed like she was heading to a charity luncheon. As they loaded her into the cruiser, people were already filming on their phones. One woman from the bakery muttered, "About damn time." Back at the property, I finally let myself sit down on what was left of my porch steps. Jasper flopped beside me, tail thumping against the dirt. I wasn't done. Not by a long shot. The DA's office was preparing formal charges: criminal mischief, trespassing, destruction of property, and falsification of government documents. Bryce and the others were being called in next, but for the first time since the bulldozer tore through my wall, I could breathe. Next up was the civil trial, and I had a stack of evidence, a good lawyer, and a community that was finally starting to see through the HOA's curtain of control. I was going to make sure no one else got steamrolled the way I did. And once I was through with them, Windermere Ridge would never be the same. 3 days after Rosemary Geller's arrest, I got a knock on the trailer door just after sunrise. It was Deputy Mathers, notepad in hand, his cruiser idling behind him. He looked uneasy, like he'd rather be anywhere else. "Morning, Dorian," he said, shifting his weight. "Need a word. Something came up during the search of Geller's office." I stepped outside, pulling on my jacket. Jasper padded behind me, ears perked. Mathers flipped open his notepad and kept his voice low. "They found a storage unit registered under her name. Contents were seized yesterday. Inside were HOA records dating back nearly 15 years. Some of them shouldn't exist." I raised an eyebrow. "Meaning?" There were falsified property surveys, altered maps, even a few forged quitclaim deeds. "One of them included your parcel, dated last year, transferring usage rights to the HOA for maintenance purposes." I didn't respond right away. The cold air pressed in between us. Mathers continued. "None of the signatures match. County clerk's stamp is a fake. Forensics is running it now, but it looks like this wasn't a one-off. How many properties? Could be dozens. Some of the documents conflict with actual county records going back almost 2 decades. We're talking about systematic fraud, land encroachment, fake easements, the works." That explained the confidence Geller always walked with. She hadn't just bent rules, she'd rewritten them in secret. I called Collier the moment Mathers left. He listened in silence, then let out a low whistle. "This changes everything," he said. "If we prove this was a long-running scheme, we're not just looking at fines and restitution. We're talking racketeering, possible RICO charges." I glanced around at the remains of my land, the empty space where my cabin used to be. "Then let's make it happen." The next day, we met with Assistant District Attorney Molina. She was sharp-eyed, mid-30s, and already had 3 bankers and a city contractor under her belt from corruption cases last year. She didn't waste time. "We've initiated a full financial audit of Windermere Ridge HOA," she said, flipping through a thick binder. "Bank statements, vendor contracts, permit filings, everything. So far, we've found over $200,000 in transfers to companies that don't exist. All routed through a landscaping firm owned by Geller's cousin in Arizona." Collier leaned forward. "That's enough to trigger a federal investigation," Molina nodded. "It already has. A joint task force from the state auditor's office and the FBI is reviewing the files." "What's the timeline?" I asked. "Depends on how deep this goes, but we have enough to start indictments." "Geller won't be the only one in bracelets." That night, I drove back up to Windermere Ridge, but not to my land. I parked along Aspen Hollow Drive near Lot 17, where a contractor named Mike Dorsey had lived before selling his house in a panic 6 months earlier. Rumor was he'd been fined into the ground for unauthorized renovations. I'd never met him, but I remembered reading his name in the HOA's meeting minutes while digging through the expansion documents. I knocked on his old neighbor's door, a retired schoolteacher named Helen who testified for us anonymously during the evidence hearing. "I heard about Geller," she said before I even asked, stepping aside to let me in. "I've been waiting for this moment for years." She walked me to her kitchen and pulled out a shoebox filled with paper. Letters, receipts, notices every violation she and her neighbors had received over the last 5 years. Most were absurd: fines for planting native grass, citations for leaving porch lights on past 10. But tucked in the middle was something more important. It was a letter from 2019 sent to Mike Dorsey. Not on HOA letterhead, but from a private law office out of Boulder. It claimed his property had been temporarily reassigned for road maintenance staging and threatened legal action if he interfered. The signature was Alan Bryce's. Mike tried to fight it, Helen said, but then he got hit with 6 citations in 2 weeks. One of them claimed his garage was too reflective. He caved, sold the house and left, said the HOA was bleeding him dry. I took the letter. A week later, we tracked down Mike in a small town north of Rock Springs. He agreed to testify after we showed him the forged deed tied to his lot. He wasn't the only one. One by one, other residents came forward, some anonymous, others ready to sit in front of the grand jury. The civil case was scheduled for early spring. But before that, a criminal hearing was set to determine whether Geller and the other board members would stand trial. The courthouse was packed that morning: press, neighbors, even a few ex-HOA members who'd resigned quietly years ago. Geller sat behind her defense attorney, eyes straight ahead. Her pastel wardrobe was gone, replaced by a gray blazer and a look that didn't flinch once, even when the indictment was read aloud. 24 counts. Fraud, racketeering, falsification of public documents, destruction of private property, and conspiracy. Bryce and 2 other board members, Tamara Holtz and Gregory Vance, were next. They looked less composed. Bryce kept fidgeting with his tie. Holtz refused to make eye contact with anyone. Vance looked like he'd aged 10 years in a week. Melina laid out the preliminary evidence: the forged surveys, the fraudulent financials, the kickbacks, and most damning of all, the pattern of targeting non-compliant homeowners just before major land value assessments. They weren't enforcing community standards. They were running a real estate racket. Outside the courthouse, I was approached by a man in a tweed jacket and reading glasses. He introduced himself as Thomas Reddington, a journalist with the State Investigative Bureau. "I've been following HOAs for years," he said. "But I've never seen one this corrupt. You mind if I write a piece on this?" "Write whatever you want," I told him. "Just make sure they don't get to hide behind acronyms and bylaws anymore." As the weeks passed, the community transformed. Helen and a few others formed a residents' committee to draft a petition for dissolution of the HOA. The preliminary signatures hit the threshold in under 4 days. People were done living under threats and double speak. The court granted our civil suit motion to proceed. Damages were being calculated with interest. Collier estimated my cabin alone would be valued at close to $280,000 after accounting for replacement, emotional distress, and punitive damages. But I wasn't in it for the money. I rebuilt slowly, this time with help. Neighbors I barely knew before showed up with lumber, tools, even meals. Jasper got more treats than he knew what to do with. Every nail I drove into that new frame felt like clearing another inch of rot from the mountain. One afternoon, as I was setting the rafters, Collier pulled up in his truck. "You're going to want to hear this," he said, holding a folder thick with paperwork. "The judge just approved the injunction to freeze all HOA assets. That includes their emergency fund, administrative accounts, and the maintenance reserve. They can't touch a dime, not a cent. And the IRS is circling. Turns out their tax filings were just as fake as their bylaws." I nodded and looked out over the ridge. The pines were swaying softly, untouched. The silence was a good kind, the kind I'd built this place for. "They picked the wrong cabin," I said. Collier grinned. "No. They picked the wrong man. And this time, there'd be no rebuilding for them, only reckoning." The spring thaw rolled in late that year, but it brought more than melting snow. The criminal trial was set to begin the second week of April. The courthouse in Kingsmill, barely large enough to seat 50, was already buzzing with press vans and folding chairs by the time I showed up with Collier. He carried a leather briefcase stuffed with exhibits and court orders. I carried a manila folder labeled Restitution Plan. Not for me, for the other residents. By then, Geller and her board weren't just defendants, they were headlines. Every local station had aired footage of their arraignment. A few national outlets picked it up too. Mountain HOA fraud scandal, they called it. Reddington's article ran in the Sunday paper with a photo of my half-built cabin and the caption, "The man who refused to move." Inside the courtroom, the air was tense. Geller sat flanked by two separate attorneys. Bryce, Vance, and Holtz were seated behind them, each with their own counsel, none of them speaking to each other. Their unity had cracked wide open. The prosecution had offered plea deals to everyone but Geller. She refused. According to Melina, she believed she could still walk away clean. "She thinks the board will take the fall alone," Melina said when we met in her office the day before. "She's betting on confusion and paperwork to bury intent." "She ever admit she authorized the demolition?" I asked. "No." But we found something better. She handed me a printout, an email chain between Geller and a contractor. It wasn't about my cabin. It was about another property, 2 years earlier. A rental owned by a former Marine named Luis Ortega. The email gave explicit instructions to clear the structure before the appraisal deadline and attached a phony condemnation notice. Ortega had been deployed when it happened, came back to find his house gone and his insurance claim denied. No one ever held the HOA responsible, until now. The trial opened with testimony from a forensic accountant, a woman named Celia Tran, who laid out how Geller's network of shell companies funneled funds from inflated fines and fake maintenance projects. The jury sat still as stone while she explained how board members pushed out residents with threats, then sold the homes to friendly buyers at reduced rates. When Collier took the stand, he walked the jury through the forged survey maps and the fake expansion vote. He didn't grandstand. He didn't need to. The evidence did the work. Then came my turn. As I stepped up, I caught Geller watching me, eyes narrowed but unreadable. I didn't look away. Collier guided the questions. I described the night of the demolition, the trail cam footage, the forged documents, the chain of events that followed. I stuck to facts, dates, and names. No embellishments, just the truth. When I finished, Melina stood and asked a single question. "Mr. McCale, if the defendants had simply left you alone, would any of this have happened?" "No," I said, "but once they made it personal, I made it permanent." Later that afternoon, the court heard from Ortega. He spoke calmly, but his voice caught when he described returning home to rubble. He said he'd spent 2 years fighting the insurance company and another year trying to get answers from the HOA. They never took his calls. He'd lost everything down to his grandfather's medals. After that, the defense tried to pivot. Geller's lawyers claimed she'd been misled by her board. Holtz's team argued she was just a secretary who filed what she was told. Bryce claimed he signed documents under duress. Vance flat out denied knowing anything, but then Melina brought out the audit logs. Every board member had logged into the HOA's internal system to approve the fake property transfers. Every time, the digital signature matched. And every time, the approval was followed within days by a fine, a lien, or a non-compliance order. By the end of the 3rd week, the jury deliberated for just under 7 hours guilty. On all 24 counts, Geller's face didn't change. She sat still, hands folded in her lap, staring at the floor like the verdict hadn't landed. Bryce slumped forward. Holtz closed her eyes. Vance muttered something under his breath and didn't stop until the bailiff let him out. Sentencing was scheduled for the following month, but the judge made it clear. Prison time was guaranteed. The fraud charges alone carried up to 15 years. Add conspiracy and destruction of property, and they were looking at decades. Back at the Ridge, something changed. The residents who'd once kept their heads down now walked the streets without glancing over their shoulders. The petition to dissolve the HOA passed by a wide margin. The county approved it, and a temporary oversight committee was installed to handle things like road upkeep and trash collection until a proper utilities district could be formed. Helen was voted chair. She called me that night. "We're naming the new trail loop after you," she said. "The McCale Pass." "No need for that," I said. "We don't name it for you," she said. "We name it to remind ourselves not to forget." A week later, I stood at the edge of the ridge watching the last of the snow disappear into the earth. My new cabin was nearly finished. The roof was higher this time, the porch wider. I'd built a small guest shed off to the side and added a rainwater cistern with a backup filter. Jasper had his own fenced yard with a shaded lean-to and enough space to chase squirrels without vanishing into the trees. Collier came by with a bottle of rye and 2 tin cups. We sat on the new steps and watched the sun bleed over the pines. "You ever think about what would have happened if you just moved?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "I'd be reading about this in someone else's lawsuit," he nodded. "You ever think about running for council?" I laughed. "I've had enough politics for one lifetime." He set the bottle between us and looked out across the valley. "Well, whatever you decide, you've already done more for this place than any council ever has." I didn't answer right away. The wind was soft. The trees were quiet. And for the first time in a long time, peace didn't feel like something I had to defend. It just felt earned.